Every year, millions upon millions of dollars are spent on green screens, stunt doubles, stunt coordinators, and most of all, VFX artists who spend the majority of their time in any given week working on big, explosive action sequences in an effort to blow the audience away with the kind of material they see almost every time they go to the movies. And while those poor artists slaving away at their work have certainly made some pretty good stuff, a lot of it fails to stick with me, even after I've taken the time to go out to a theater, blow an absurd amount of money on tickets and popcorn, and sit in a giant dark room for hours on end. However, there is a roughly 7-minute video on YouTube called Spiral that is an episode of a goofy, low-budget Halo web series where characters talk by bobbing their heads up and down. And it contains an action sequence that is about 794 times more epic, engaging, and visually interesting than a vast majority of the CGI spectacle that Hollywood puts out. And while I don't want to call attention away from all the other people who worked on the show, it's largely because Monty Oum was a damn genius. By the great old ones, does it still hurt talking about him in the past tense. Something that his absence from RWBY has really made me miss is the kind of creativity he would bring to his fights. It always seemed like he was competing with himself to use the different aspects of the fight scene, like the environment, the idiosyncrasies of the character's weapons, etc., in the most clever ways possible. And in this scene, he had quite a few different elements to play with. This is one of the most complex action scenes that RT has put out. It's simultaneously an extremely fast-paced chase scene, a shootout, a MacGuffin keep away, and a close quarters martial arts brawl, involving multiple gunships, jetpacks, jeeps mounted with Gatling guns, a motorcycle, and numerous trucks and cars, all of which is taking place on a crowded highway. And they take full advantage of pretty much all of those different aspects, with that clever creativity constantly on display. For example, this jetpack soldier putting his back against a truck for cover as though it's a stationary barricade in a traditional shootout, the indescribably badass way that Tex takes out this jeep and this gunship, and then in the next shot we just watch it explode behind her while she's already pulling out a new gun. Maine is about to get executed on top of their jeep, so York just jerks the wheel to the side and throws everybody off. Then, the payoff for all the potential energy of that slow motion shot is that the jetpack dude slams into a bunch of barrels on the back of a truck, which goes spilling all over the highway. And that's not the only point of the barrels. Carolina uses one for cover, and the soldiers start throwing them at the jeep. Later, she and Maine go back to back in the middle of a fight on top of the truck, and swap the briefcase from Carolina to Maine via the magnetic holster on the back of their suits. This is the coolest dodging bullet shot I've ever seen, and of course, Tex throws a motorcycle at a gunship by driving it up a ramp and backflipping off of it. Of course. But these creative ideas aren't just occurring in a vacuum. The general idea behind what this scene is trying to convey is that the team's mission, to escape with this briefcase, is rapidly flying out of control. Specifically out of Carolina's control, who is desperately trying to maintain it so that she can outdo Tex. Now, considering all the insane action beats I just listed off, and that this sequence is meant to feel like it's flying off the rails, you might expect it to be sheer chaos. But there's a very clear method to the madness. That series of action beats is strung together by clear progression and good old-fashioned smart filmmaking. Another thing that I've always really appreciated about Monty Alma's work is that there is never a moment where you don't know what's happening, no matter how crazy things get. So rather than bumping up the chaos by cutting every 2 seconds and confusing the ever-living shit out of the audience, they do so by amping up the kinetic energy of the chase and the amount of danger to the characters. In addition, they use something that any film bro will appreciate, a huge long take with the camera swinging in circles around the action. It emphasizes the sense of things flying out of control, with new elements constantly jumping in and out of frame and the focus always shifting around. But to accomplish this, they sacrifice nothing. Even throughout the long take, we're always seeing things from the best possible angle, with the camera gliding perfectly into place for each and every shot. As a result, we get moments like this, and this, and this. Just look at how the motion emphasizes a sense of confusion. And throughout the entire sequence, but especially during that long take, the camera is always following the action, directing our focus so that we can keep track of all the important beats of this little story amongst all the chaos. It's as though this sequence is a moving display, and the camera is a tour guide, taking us through the mess to show us all the best stuff from the best angles. You even hear little whooshing sounds when the camera moves faster than normal for a second, or when something flies past it, like we're really there. but despite the constant motion, it took me a couple of rewatches to realize that the long take was even there. You may have heard the phrase, good filmmaking is invisible, and this sequence is a great example. You're so immersed in the action by the careful filmmaking that whether or not it's cutting isn't even something you're aware of. But it isn't just a well-directed spectacle of explosions, car crashes, and punches, because, as I've mentioned a couple times now, this sequence is a string of story beats. I made a video on the role of story in fight scenes a while back. As with many of my older videos, and some of my recent ones, it doesn't do a great job communicating its point, so I don't recommend watching it, but I still kinda stand behind the gist of it, which is that a good fight scene either propels the story forward or creates its own engaging mini-story to maintain that sense of propulsion. For most of this action sequence, it's taking that second approach, a tug-of-war of ups and downs as our heroes gain the upper hand, quickly lose it, and then gain it again, paced out with expertly crafted choreography and epic shot composition in between. Everyone has a very obvious objective: get the briefcase and get away, which is helped by the stark white coloration of the briefcase, making it very clear where it is and which team has it at any given time. With the deft introduction of new elements like the barrel truck and equally deft erasure of old elements like this amazing shot where Maine reappears in the frame by punching the sniper dude down the highway, it really does feel like a quickly progressing little story. And this is accomplished with very minimal dialogue, the small amount we do get adding greatly to the scene. Carolina barking orders in that stern tone of voice to mask her desperation, and trying to ensure her teammates are as dedicated to beating Tex as she is. York shouting out little bits of advice like he's on pins and needles worrying for his teammates as they fight. And Maine doesn't usually say much, but he does take a bullet for Carolina, which is pretty interesting considering where the relationship ends up. They even work little bits of comedy into the cracks. In other words, the action is not without personality, but the need for story never interferes with the flow of the action. However, towards the end of the chase, the storytelling starts to lean a little closer to that first approach I mentioned, where it progresses the overarching narrative, becoming a very important part of Carolina's character arc. I'm not gonna get into the whole thing because this was supposed to be a short video and I'm already breaking that rule, but to put it mildly, Carolina is very competitive, mainly because she's striving for someone's attention. Tex, however, upon recently entering the story, has been hogging all of the attention and is very, very close to taking Carolina's top spot on the literal leaderboard. So, as Tex finally arrives on the scene of the briefcase, it turns into a race. It isn't even a matter of whether or not they'll get it, but rather, who.
Don't let her grab it first. Who cares who gets it first? I do.
So, in her determination, Carolina activates some kind of super speed and somehow manages to kick the already insane velocity of this sequence up a notch, throwing herself at her goal with no regard for her own safety and pulling ridiculously daring moves like just jumping off the highway and using a grappling hook to Spider-Man her way to the next rooftop. In this shot, you can literally see her focus, a burning concentration on her objective. She's moving so fast that as she leaps in between two buildings, the glass on either side shatters, which is just awesome. The jetpack guy gets tackled onto the next highway, and at this point they're both moving so fast that they're just sliding across the ground. A grand total of 3 shots is dedicated to how devastating this punch is about to be, before the ground starts to slant beneath her, throwing them both into the air at the exact moment she connects. With her throwing her weight into that punch and suddenly losing her leverage, this is the moment she loses control. Now they're both just tumbling down the highway at like Mach 7. The dude with the briefcase gets hit by a car and goes flying, while Carolina slides underneath a truck in a shower of sparks as her armor grinds against the metal. And then she slams full force into a wall, collapsing to the ground as the theme music that has been exploding in the background grinds to a screeching halt. And as she struggles to stand, Tex walks up, takes the fruit of her labor, and leaves. All of her effort to maintain her position, trying to keep control over the situation, and she still lost it in the end. Precisely because she was moving so fast, trying so hard not to lose. Tex was patient. She stayed back and never put herself in the kind of danger that Carolina did, so that when the moment was right, she could just stroll right up and claim her prize. Looking at the scene as a whole, you really do feel like things are just getting faster and faster until they spiral out of control, like when you run at top speed down a steep hill and eventually trip and fall. The overall progression and focus on this singular briefcase gives the whole sequence a sense of unity, despite the general sense of chaos it communicates and the amount of different elements at play. And thus, this is one of the most exciting, kinetic, frantic, tense, immersive, and well-communicated action sequences I have ever seen. Coming from an arc of this goofy Halo machinima that is absolutely full of incredible action design. But even out of all of the fight scenes in this section of the show with that certified Monty Alma brand of awesome, this one takes the briefcase by a mile.